Welcome kindreds, it's Jessica the Story Witch, and this is the video for letter S of the A to Z of Modern Witchcraft series that I'm making on my channel. And I know a lot of my videos for this series have been a little bit more kind of thought pieces rather than practical things. And I think that's because really I feel like our thinking and our understanding totally underpins everything else that we do in our practice. So I haven't, like if you want to find videos on making candles or setting up altars or, all the kind of more practical elements of things, there are millions of videos like that already on YouTube. Maybe not millions, but lots. So I didn't feel like I needed to, I didn't really feel I had anything particularly to add from that point of view in some ways. And so that is why I've focused on what I feel is not so much more important, because obviously those practical things are really important, but you can easily find the information for those practical things, whereas the reasons behind it I really feel like are something that we need to focus on more, and that's what I feel like I wanted to share about. So these next two videos, this one which is going to be S, which is for substitution, and T, the next one is going to be T for tools, and they're going to be probably my most practical oriented videos of the entire series. But even though they are the more practical oriented videos, they are still going to be more about the understanding that underpins things rather than how, I'm not going to give you loads of specific examples. So if that's what you're looking for, you've come to the wrong place. I'm talking about watching now, aren't I? That just seems a bit silly. Anyway, S is for substitute or substitution. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do yet. And basically what that means is using something in place of something else. So that comes up a lot. I mean, if you're a cook, then you'll know about the idea of substitution. If you're making something and you realise, if you're following a recipe, or even if you're not following a recipe, if it's a recipe you've made in the past before and you need to use something instead of something that is called for in the recipe, then you will need to either omit it or substitute it with something else, use something instead. And it's exactly the same in magical workings too. Sometimes you will change things because you don't have the thing that you need, especially if you're following a kind of more, some of the older kind of grimoires and things like that will have quite obscure things. And I think half the time that was because you really had to put an awful lot of effort in to make up the charm. If it's asking you for certain herbs which have only been picked at certain times or under certain moons and things like that, that is a lot of effort to put in. I haven't long finished reading Gemma Gary's Silence of the Tree, I think it was in there, where she was talking about how some cures for certain things, like a cure for epilepsy, was for the person, if it was a female person who had epilepsy, she had to collect like 50 pennies that were given to her freely from people of the opposite sex, and they then needed to be given to a blacksmith, and no, she wouldn't pay them any money, and the blacksmith would forge it into something else, like a ring with a circle in it that she would wear around her neck. I think that's what it was. So the amount of effort that you need to go to do that is pretty phenomenal. The number of people that need to be involved and things like that in the casting would make it much less likely that you would do it. I think that is sometimes part of the point, in that if something is difficult, and you have to kind of go through these steps to do it and to get the things you need, then if you don't really need to do it, you won't do it. Or you'll think very carefully about whether you actually need to do all of the certain things or whether you might need to substitute sometimes. So yeah, I think looking at what it is that is called for is an important part of setting out, and also why that thing is called for, like why, what is the point of that. Often in magic, things are used for sympathetic reasons, which means you use something to kind of represent it. It has the same kind of idea as what you're trying to do or trying to get at. So and now my head has gone blank for examples, but I will come back to that anyway because I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit. So going back to the idea of a recipe and using, say you're cooking something and you may substitute because you don't have the thing that you need, and that's the thing I see most common, people asking questions about, like, what can I use instead of this, what can I use instead of this? And you know, that's a really valid reason, and like I said, sometimes it's because the particular ingredient is hard to find, or the thing that you need to do is difficult, or it needs to be collected at a certain time, you know, you don't have that thing, so you need to use something else. But sometimes you might want to substitute because you want to change the outcome. So again, thinking about a recipe, if you choose to use slightly different combination of herbs, or if you choose to use a different vegetable as the base, that will also change the outcome, but it's not because you didn't have what you needed. Sorry, I'm a little bit uncomfortable, I'm just wriggling myself around. It wasn't because you didn't have what you needed, it was because you wanted to create something a little bit different. So obviously in both of those instances you will be substituting things, but for slightly different reasons. In the first instance you'll probably want to try and find substitutes which are quite similar to the thing that you originally wanted, and in the second instance you will be looking for different things because you're aiming for a different kind of outcome. So I hope that makes sense as to the reasons of why you might substitute. And I also wanted to talk about how you might choose those things as substitutes. You know, where if you look in lots of books, they'll have long lists of correspondences, you know, so they'll say like these herbs could be substituted for this, or sometimes there'll be like a kind of catch-all which you can substitute for anything, you know, and that kind of thing. But it bugs me in a way because it kind of de-skills you. If you understand the ingredients that you're using, you won't need to look things up in books so much because you will understand the properties of the thing that you're using. And if you don't have a certain thing, if you understand what that was adding to your recipe or to your spell, you will easily be able to come across another thing that can do that instead. And also, maybe I shouldn't say that yet. Perhaps I should give an example. So say you want to say a spell calls for witch hazel, for example, and it might be a spell for like closing something off, or kind of shutting something down, finishing something, you know. So you might be performing it on a waning moon, and the spell says you need witch hazel. And if you understand that the reason witch hazel is being used in that context is because it is an astringent, because it kind of draws things out. Also, it binds things. So, you know, perhaps it might be a binding spell. Perhaps you're binding somebody to stay away from you or something like that, you know. So those astringent properties, which are actually the physical properties of the herb, are what you are looking for. So if you don't have witch hazel and you know that's what witch hazel is doing for you in that particular context that you want, you can more easily think of something else suitable that will be good for it. And it also means you can more easily use the structure of that spell and use something different if you want a different outcome. Do you see what I mean? I hope I'm explaining this okay. Like I said, I don't often do the more practically videos because I feel like everyone does things so differently themselves, and it's the sort of thing you kind of need to do and try and see what happens and use the things, and then you gain more experience in the actual use of the things. And I tend to stick with a more limited number, especially with herbs, and I suppose I'm with stones really as well, because I feel like I know those things really well, and so I work well with those things. And you do need to kind of build up a bond with the ingredients that you, I suppose not a bond really, that might be, I don't know, maybe it's not overstating it. You know, you do have a connection with those ingredients. You understand them, you understand how they work and why they work and what they do, and you understand them on a kind of physical level. So you understand what the physical properties of the thing is. And like I said, it's not just for herbs. So like with a stone, for example, why do people choose diamonds for engagement rings, and why do they use diamond as like a anniversary, a 60th anniversary? It's because diamonds are bloody hard, you know, they're the hardest thing. They're really enduring, they don't break easily. And so if you want that, and you know, there we go, an example of sympathetic magic, because the thing that you're using is showing what you want. And what you want when you give somebody a diamond ring is for that relationship between the two of you to endure, for it to not be easily broken or easily scratched. Yeah? So when you understand the physical property of the thing, whether it be herbs, stone, colours as well, you know, colours are the same, but I will come back to that. You understand the physical property of it, so then you can see why it might be used. You know, is something got antibacterial properties? You know, it kills germs. That might be an interesting thing to use. Or something might have an aphrodisiac property, you know, on a physical level. You know, what you can use that for. And obviously herbs, stones, you know, you have to understand these things on a physical level. And that is why I prefer to kind of limit my relationships with these ingredients, because I don't like to spread myself too thinly and my knowledge too thinly. I like to work, I suppose in a way, I like to stick with what I know. I do sometimes try and push myself out of the comfort zone a little bit, but you know, when you are happy working with certain things and you understand those things, it makes it easy, and then you know, you can add more things after then. So I feel like people sometimes get overwhelmed because they'll get a herbal and they'll be like, but there's literally thousands of herbs in here, how can I possibly know how to use all of these things, you know? And then, or they might open like a crystal Bible or something, and like I think I had Judy Hall's crystal Bible like 25 years ago or something when she first did it, and then I think now there's like volume 12 or something stupid like that of the crystal Bible. There's so many possibilities with all the minerals and things that are out there, so it's overwhelming sometimes, but really all you need is the thing that is going to do what you want, isn't it? So you don't have to know all of the things, you just have to know the things that you're using or you're thinking about using really well. So yeah, that's what I mean. So that's the kind of understanding those ingredients on like a physical level. And then you also need to kind of form an understanding of them on an emotional level as well. So with herbs, certainly that might include like sort of ingesting them and seeing how you feel and seeing how they affect you. The same with stones, I suppose, same with colours, you know, it is an emotional response to those things. And obviously different people will respond in different ways. And actually Magpie the Moonstruck, she made a really good point on one of my last videos. Which one was that now? I was talking about herbals. And I can't remember, sorry. And she said, you know, actually, even on a physical level, different herbs will have different effects on different people. So you can't necessarily guarantee that what is going to work in one way for one person will work the same way for a different person, you know. It's much more personal than that. And so although you can kind of come up with the physical properties, it won't be kind of set in stone, like this will always happen when you use this, you know, this always has this property. Certain people react to it in different ways. And even more so when you're thinking about the emotional effects of something, you know, different people will have different emotional responses to things. So like with herbs, perhaps the scent of the herb will also trigger a memory, you know. When you take a certain herb into your body, you might feel differently than somebody else who will take that herb into the body and they'll feel different ways. And often that is to do with how your body is sitting, how it's feeling, you know, like some herbs are just kind of balancing for everyone usually with that caveat that not everything works the same for everyone. But then some herbs might like raise your blood pressure, which would be great for somebody who had low blood pressure but not great for somebody who had high blood pressure, you know. So you have to use that kind of individual response to the thing as well. So the best person to experiment on is yourself. Be safe, you know, obviously, but you will get to know your personal relationships with the herbs and how they work for you. And then you know, usually that kind of spills out to family members and perhaps community members and things as well. Then when you start having kind of tried and tested sets of ingredients that do certain things, you know, and you will learn more then by doing that, because you'll see other people's responses to those things and you can note those down and see how that goes, you know. I had a really good cradle cap recipe that I developed when my daughter was little and she had cradle cap, and it was brilliant. And I gave it to loads of people. You know, I was making it up for lots and lots of people then, because I was involved in the community. I was running a mum and baby kind of group, and you know, lots of people were having a similar problem, and it worked a charm for, you know, for lots of people, which was really cool. So you're thinking about how things work on a physical level, how things resonate on an emotional level, and then also the mental level as well, because with anything that you might use in a spell, you will have your own ideas about it, and those ideas will be formed probably from what you know about the physical properties and what you know about how the emotional effect that it has on you, or is kind of supposed to have on all people. But some things will have other associated meanings. Like if you think about like a rose, for example, yes, it's got certain physical properties, yes, it's got certain emotional properties, and those emotional properties have been very much built up to make it into a kind of icon of a flower that we know is a flower that's very much associated with love and with passion. Sometimes obviously different colours come into play here again, and I keep talking about colour, and I don't go into it. I am going to mention it now, because the colours, often within spells there'll be colours recommended for things as well, like you must use a green candle for this, and you must use a blue candle for that, or a black candle for this as a protective spell, you know, or you know. And those colours, quite often they'll be based on the framework that the author of the spell is using. You know, they're the colours that the author will have found has worked for them. But if you don't work within that same framework, if you come from a different culture, perhaps you will have different understandings of what those colours mean. You know, the kind of classic one that people talk about when they talk about how colours mean different things in different cultures, in the like in the UK, when people die, you know, the kind of mourning colour, funeral colour is black, whereas in China the mourning colour is white, you know. And I think, I'm not sure if this is true, but this is a story that I was told, that when Viagra first came out, I'm maybe gonna get this the wrong way around now. I've never actually taken Viagra. I don't know anyone who does, but I think it's a little blue pill, and it worked really, really well for loads of people, but for some reason in Italy it just wasn't working very well, and you know, they couldn't really understand why. And then they found out, they kind of dug into it, and it turned out that because the colour blue in Italy, because Italy is a very kind of heavily Catholic country mainly, and blue is associated with the Virgin Mary, when the colour blue was actually having a kind of non-erotic effect on the people taking it. They were thinking of the Virgin Mary, they were thinking of like Jesus, and they were thinking, I probably shouldn't be having sex. So it was having the opposite effect before they'd even taken it, really. It was dampening down. You know, that's how powerful our minds are. They can change the effects of a physical substance we put into our bodies. So they changed the colour of the pill in Italy to pink, and now it's working a charm. So, you know, that kind of emotional connection, and even the spiritual connection with the thing, you know, understanding on a spiritual level what it does on a spiritual level. Sage, you know, is one that is, everyone knows about sage, because it's the kind of thing, you know, you expect to see people waving around and using it to purify spaces and things like that. And it's almost become like a kind of cliche now, you know, like if you see people using it in sitcoms and stuff, you know, it's usually to take the piss out of hippies, you know. But obviously, on a spiritual level, for like a lot of Native American communities, it is a very sacred herb. And people seem to think of it as like a kind of purifying, it's a protective then. They think of it as a protective herb. But actually, I find, and I know a lot of other people do find as well, that it pushes everything out. So it actually is like a complete, like it empties a space of spiritual energy. And if you use sage just like on its own, it will create like a void, which actually is not what you want, because voids in nature tend to act as vacuums and kind of suck things in. So actually I find like if I'm going to be burning sage, which I do, then I like to also then burn frankincense perhaps, or you want to refill the space then with something else. So kind of getting a little bit off topic with that here, but it's understanding your ingredients. And sometimes you have to put, well, not sometimes, always you need to put the work into actually using them rather than just reading about them, because by reading about them, that's going to give you that mental level of understanding. But unless you actually use them, okay, so if it's an incense, you need to burn it. If it's an essential oil, you need to smell it. You need to use it on your skin. If it's a stone, you need to carry it with you. You need to maybe have it in jewelry. You need to understand these things to be able to use them effectively. And if you're going to be substituting for altering something for something else within a spell, whether that is to create the same effect as the author intended or as you intended if you were the author, when you're writing your own, which is the best, I think, why are you choosing what you're choosing? What is it about it? Is it because you looked in a book and it was said that if you're doing a protection spell, then you want this? If you understand the actual properties, not just like, oh, it's good for protection in a kind of vague way. Why is it good for protection? What is it about that thing that is good for protection? Sometimes it's the colour. Often with crystals, it's the colour, other than sometimes it's to do with like the hardness, like we talked about with diamond, or to do with like the flakeability of it. That is not the technical term. It's that kind of thing, it is understanding the totality of the thing that you're using. And like I found, like I said, that I tend to use a more limited amount of ingredients. Sorry if it's a bit noisy in the background. I tend to use a more limited amount of ingredients because building those relationships takes time, and once you've built a relationship and you know something that works, you tend to go, oh, okay, I'll use that. Or that'll be good for that, So I do each year try and add a few more things into my inventory kind of thing. Not necessarily gather those things, but we'll kind of experiment with them. And I definitely do find that certain things work better for my own personal, with my own kind of personal resonance than other things. And you'll find the same, I'm sure. So I hope that has been vaguely interesting and useful. It's kind of saying, like I said, I suppose at the end of the last one, that you really need to work with things to fully understand them. And like good cooks, when they are making recipes, they'll easily know, oh, I'm going to use this instead of this because I know that's going to be really good, So yeah, I think that is it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Warmest blessings. I will see you very soon.